Sometimes, the collapse of a life you thought was perfect is the first step toward finding who you really are. Cheating husband laughed at his wife's farewell letter until he found a pregnancy test next to her. Madison Hale's fingers trembled as she held the small velvet box. She discovered it, tucked away in her husband's study drawer late that afternoon, sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Westwood estate, casting long shadows across the pristine hardwood floors. She hadn't been searching for anything specific, just organizing Derek's papers as she always did, being the perfect wife he expected her to be. The gold heart pendant gleamed mockingly in her palm, its delicate surface bearing an inscription that made her stomach twist. "To my dearest Camille." The necklace was exquisite, clearly chosen with care, the kind of care Derek hadn't shown her in years. Maddie's reflection in the study's antique mirror caught her attention. At 30, she still turned heads with her chestnut hair and deep hazel eyes, always perfectly styled in her navy silk blouse and tailored trousers. The image of suburban grace, just as her upbringing in a prestigious Philadelphia family had shaped her to be. But now, she could see the cracks in that perfection, the quiet desperation in her eyes she'd been ignoring for so long. Her phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Surgery running late. Don't wait up." The same message she'd received countless times before. Each one now took on a new painful meaning. How many of those late surgeries had been lies? How many nights had he spent with Camille while Maddie sat alone in their massive house making excuses for his absence? Moving to his desk, she found herself opening his laptop. The password was the same. It had always been their wedding date. The irony wasn't lost on her. His emails loaded, and there it was. Correspondence with a jewelry store about the pendant, intimate messages with Camille, dinner reservations for two at places he'd never taken Maddie. The familiar wave of nausea that had been her companion for the past few weeks returned. But this time, she knew it wasn't just from heartbreak. Her hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach, where their child grew, unaware of the chaos surrounding its existence. The home pregnancy test she'd taken that morning lay in her purse. 2 pink lines that should have brought joy now felt like another chain, binding her to a man who had never truly been hers. Derek had always said he wanted children, the perfect addition to their perfect life. But now Maddie wondered if he'd wanted them with her at all. She moved through their house like a ghost, each room filled with memories that felt tainted. The kitchen, where she'd prepared countless dinners he'd missed. The living room, where she'd waited up night after night. The bedroom, where she'd lay awake, pretending not to notice the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his clothes. In their walk-in closet, Maddie pulled out a small suitcase, the one she used for weekend trips to visit her aunt years ago. Her hands moved mechanically, packing essentials, clothes, documents, the few pieces of jewelry that were truly hers. She caught a whiff of her Tom Ford white suede perfume, the scent that had become her signature, her armor. She left the bottle behind on their antique writing desk, a wedding gift from her parents. Madison penned a letter. Her handwriting, usually perfect and controlled, wavered slightly as she wrote words she'd held back for years. Next to the letter, she placed her house keys and the positive pregnancy test. The sun had set by the time she finished, leaving the house in shadows. Maddie took one last look around, her designer heels clicking against the floor, a sound that had always made her feel sophisticated, powerful. Now it just reminded her of all the times she'd walked on eggshells, trying to maintain the illusion of their perfect life. With her suitcase in hand and tears finally falling freely down her cheeks, Madison Hale walked out of the life she'd spent years pretending was enough. She didn't know where she was going, but for the first time in her adult life, she was choosing herself, and the future growing inside her over the facade of perfection she'd been taught to value above all else. As she drove away from Westwood, the weight of her decision pressed against her chest, but beneath the fear and uncertainty, something else flickered to life. Hope. Somewhere beyond the shadows of her marriage, beyond the expectations that had shaped her entire existence, a new Madison waited to emerge. And this time she wouldn't settle for anything less than real love, starting with learning to love herself. The drive to Wrens Bay took nearly 4 hours, but to Maddie, it felt like crossing a lifetime. Rain pelted her windshield as she followed the coastal highway, each mile putting more distance between her and the life she'd left behind. Her great-aunt's stories of this small Maine town had always felt like fairy tales, tales of a place where the ocean could heal troubled souls and where people were genuine, not just well-rehearsed actors in society's play. The "Welcome to Wren's Bay" sign emerged through the misty darkness, its weathered blue paint barely visible in her headlights. The town looked different from her childhood memories. Smaller, perhaps, but somehow more real than the glossy world she'd inhabited in Philadelphia. Maddie pulled into the parking lot of the Harborview Inn, a modest 3-story building that overlooked the harbor. It wasn't the 5-star hotel she was accustomed to, but its warm yellow lights promised something she needed more than luxury: anonymity. The elderly receptionist barely glanced at the credit card Maddie presented, one Derek didn't know about, linked to an account she'd been quietly building over the years, just in case. She'd never admitted to herself what that case might be. Until now. "Room 312, dear," the woman said, sliding over a key, an actual metal key, not the electronic card she was used to. "Breakfast starts at 7. Watch that first step on the stairs. It creaks something awful." In her room, Maddie stood by the window, watching fishing boats rock gently in the harbor. The decor was dated, with faded floral wallpaper and a quilted bedspread that had seen better days. But the view was worth more than all the designer furniture in her Westwood home. Her phone had been buzzing periodically throughout the drive. Now she finally looked at it. 27 missed calls from Derek, 15 text messages, their tone evolving from irritation to confusion to something approaching panic. "Where are you? This isn't funny, Maddie. Whatever this is about, we can talk about it. Please come home. I can explain everything." The last message made her laugh, a hollow sound in the quiet room. Explain everything? Like he'd explained away the lipstick on his collar last Christmas, or the mysterious weekend conferences that never seemed to have any documentation. Her hand moved to her stomach again, a gesture that was quickly becoming habitual. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered, her voice catching. "And we're going to be okay." Morning brought weak sunlight and the smell of coffee drifting up from the inn restaurant. Maddie, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, clothes that would have earned her mother's disapproval, ventured downstairs. Her usual breakfast of designer yogurt and organic granola seemed like a relic from another life. The restaurant was nearly empty, save for a woman sitting at the counter, her silver hair caught in the morning light. She was reading a well-worn paperback, a cup of coffee cooling beside her. "First time in Wren's Bay?" the woman asked without looking up from her book as Maddie slid onto a nearby stool. "No," Maddie replied, then corrected herself. "Well, yes, not since I was a child." Now the woman did look up, warm brown eyes studying Maddie with unexpected intensity. "Ah, returner. Those are always the interesting ones." She closed her book, a collection of Mary Oliver poems. "I'm Nora Wallace. I own the Seaside Nook Cafe down the street." "Madison," she responded, deliberately omitting her last name, "though most people call me Maddie." "Maddie," Nora repeated, as if testing the name. "You look like someone who could use a proper breakfast and a friendly ear. My cafe opens in 30 minutes. Join me." There was something in Nora's direct gaze that stripped away pretense. This wasn't the practiced friendliness of Philadelphia's social circle, where every interaction was a transaction. This was something else, something real. The walk to the cafe was silent but companionable. The morning air carried the scent of salt and possibilities, and Maddie found herself breathing deeper than she had in years. Small shops lined the street, their windows displaying local crafts and maritime memorabilia. No designer boutiques, no luxury car dealerships, just honest businesses serving honest people. The Seaside Nook Cafe occupied a corner building with large windows and a faded blue awning. As Nora unlocked the door, the scent of coffee and freshly baked goods wafted out. Inside, mismatched tables and chairs created a cozy atmosphere that felt more like a living room than a business. "Welcome to my little corner of the world," Nora said, flipping on lights and moving behind the counter with practiced ease. "Now let's get some food in you. You're eating for two, aren't you?" Maddie's hand flew to her stomach, her eyes widening. "How did you?" Nora's smile was gentle but knowing. Honey, I've been around long enough to recognize that particular look of terror mixed with hope. Don't worry, your secret's safe with me. This town's good at keeping secrets, especially for those who need a fresh start. 2 weeks into her new life in Wren's Bay, Maddie had fallen into a routine at the Seaside Nook Cafe. Nora had offered her a job. Just until you figure things out, she'd said. And Maddie found herself surprisingly at home among the morning rush of fishermen and local workers. That morning, the bell above the door chimed as a tall figure ducked through the entrance. Maddie looked up from wiping down tables to see a man she'd noticed a few times before. His broad shoulders and military bearing contrasted with the casual way he wore his civilian clothes, worn jeans and a gray Henley that had seen better days. His light brown hair was slightly too long, as if he couldn't be bothered with regular haircuts anymore. "The usual, Caleb?" Nora called from behind the counter, already reaching for a large mug. He nodded. Settling into what Maddie had learned was his regular spot, the corner table with a clear view of both the door and the street outside. Old habits, Nora had explained earlier, from his days in the army. "Maddie, would you mind taking this over?" Nora asked, placing a steaming mug of black coffee and a plate with 2 blueberry muffins on the counter. "I need to check on that pie in the oven." Approaching Caleb's table, Maddie noticed the subtle tattoos on his forearms. Not the flashy kind meant to draw attention, but the kind that told stories their bearer might prefer to keep private. His fingers drummed a silent rhythm on the wooden table, but they stilled as she set down his breakfast. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter than she expected from someone his size. His eyes met hers briefly. They were a striking shade of green flecked with gold before returning to the window. A sudden crash from the kitchen made them both jump. Caleb's reaction was instant. His body tensed, one hand gripping the edge of the table, while the other reached instinctively for something at his hip that wasn't there. The moment passed quickly, but Maddie saw the flash of something raw and painful cross his face before his features settled back into careful neutrality. "Just dropped a pan," Nora called out cheerfully, but Maddie noticed how she added in a deliberately casual tone. "All clear, Caleb." Later that afternoon, during the quiet lull between lunch and dinner, Maddie found herself alone with Nora in the kitchen. "Caleb," she began hesitantly. "He was in the military," Nora nodded, her hands steady as she crimped the edges of a pie crust. "Army, did 3 tours before coming home. Now he works as a boat mechanic down at Parker's Marina." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Some wounds don't show on the outside, honey, but that doesn't make them any less real." The words hit closer to home than Nora probably realized. Maddie thought about her own invisible wounds, the years of subtle manipulation, the countless times she'd smiled through her pain at charity galas and hospital functions, playing the role of the perfect surgeon's wife. She felt a familiar tightness in her chest, one she'd grown skilled at masking. For years she'd brushed off the fluttering anxiety that would creep in before events or meetings, attributing it to stress. But deep down, she knew it ran deeper than that. It was the pressure of constant performance, of always appearing composed, loved, and enviable. And even here in Wren's Bay, surrounded by kindness, it hadn't vanished completely. Only dulled, only hidden. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Another text from Derek. "Your parents are worried sick. Whatever point you're trying to make, isn't this enough?" She deleted it without responding, but her hands shook slightly as she reached for another pie dish. The afternoon crowd began trickling in, including Caleb, who returned with a stack of books under his arm. This time, he chose a table near the counter, nodding briefly to Maddie as she passed by with a coffee pot. "Hemingway again?" Nora asked him, eyeing the books. "The library got some new ones in," he replied, his voice carrying a hint of defensiveness. "And I like the way he writes, no extra words, just what needs to be said." Maddie found herself pausing as she wiped down a nearby table, struck by the intensity in his voice. It was the most she'd heard him speak since she'd started working at the cafe. The door chimed again and a group of tourists entered, talking loudly about their plans to photograph the lighthouse at sunset. Caleb's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, and without thinking, Maddie moved to seat them. At the far end of the cafe, when she passed by his table again, he glanced up. "Thanks," he said quietly, and she knew he wasn't talking about the coffee she'd refilled earlier. "Sometimes," she replied, surprising herself, "it's nice when someone sees what you're not saying." Something shifted in his expression. A recognition, perhaps, of a shared understanding. He opened one of his books, and Maddie noticed the pages were dog-eared, marked with small notes in the margins. A man who carried books like old friends and bore his scars with quiet dignity. He was nothing like the polished and superficial world she'd left behind. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the cafe windows, Maddie felt the baby move for the first time. Just a flutter like butterfly wings. Her hand pressed against her stomach, and for a moment the weight of her secrets felt almost unbearable. "You okay?" Caleb's voice broke through her thoughts. When she met his eyes, she saw no judgment there, only a gentle concern that made her throat tight. "I will be," she answered, and for the first time since leaving Westwood, she actually believed it. The doctor's office in downtown Wrens Bay was nothing like the sleek medical facilities Maddie was used to in Philadelphia. Dr. Melissa Hartman's practice occupied an old Victorian house, its waiting room furnished with comfortable antiques rather than modern chrome and leather seating. There Maddie clutched her paperwork, her maiden name Whitaker, written in careful letters across the top. "Mrs. Whitaker," the nurse called, and Maddie started at the sound of her old name. She followed the woman down a narrow hallway decorated with local maritime paintings, her heart pounding against her ribs. Dr. Hartman proved to be a woman in her early 50s, with kind eyes and laugh lines around her mouth. She reviewed Maddie's information without comment, though her eyebrow raised slightly at the gaps in the family medical history section. "You're about 12 weeks along," she said, studying the ultrasound screen. "Everything looks healthy." She turned the monitor so Maddie could see better. "Would you like to hear the heartbeat?" The sound filled the room, strong, fast, determined. Maddie's vision blurred with tears as she watched the tiny form on the screen, its heart flickering like a star. This was real. This was happening. "I assume the father," Dr. Hartman began gently. "Isn't in the picture," Maddie finished, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. The doctor nodded, making a note in her file. "Well, you've got a healthy baby and a good support system, I hope." Maddie thought of Nora's watchful eye and warm support, of Caleb's quiet presence and understanding glances. "Yes," she said, "I do." Later that afternoon, she walked along the beach, the ultrasound photos tucked safely in her purse. The October wind whipped her hair around her face. As she watched the waves crash against the shore, a storm was brewing offshore, dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Rough weather coming," a familiar voice said behind her. Caleb stood a few feet away, his hands in the pockets of his weather-worn jacket. Like her, he seemed drawn to the beach during troubled times. "Sometimes I think the storms are more honest than the calm," she replied, wrapping her arms around herself as the wind picked up. He moved closer, offering silent companionship as they watched the waves. "You came from money," he said suddenly, not a question but an observation. "Really that obvious? The way you hold yourself, the way you fold napkins at the cafe," his lips quirked slightly. "The way you tried not to look hard, horrified at Gary's table manners during the breakfast rush." Maddie laughed despite herself. "I didn't think anyone noticed." "I notice things. Occupational hazard." He paused, then added, "Running from something or toward something?" The question caught her off guard. In the distance, lightning flickered across the dark clouds. "Both, maybe," she answered finally. "What about you? What brought you to Wrens Bay?" "Needed somewhere quiet." His jaw tightened slightly. "After my last tour, cities were too much. Too many people, too many sounds, too many ways things could go wrong." A crack of thunder made them both look up. The storm was moving faster now, the first heavy drops of rain starting to fall. "We should head back," Caleb said, already turning toward town. But Maddie remained rooted in place, the rain beginning to soak through her clothes. "I'm pregnant." She blurted out the words, carried away by the wind almost as soon as they left her mouth. But he heard them. She could tell by the way his steps faltered. He turned back to her, rain running down his face. Without a word, he shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture, so simple and yet so caring, made something inside her crack. "The father," he began. "My husband," she cut in, tasting the bitterness of the word. Well, soon-to-be ex-husband, he doesn't know about the baby. She swallowed hard. He had other priorities. Understanding darkened Caleb's eyes. They stood there in the rain, the storm raging around them, two broken people finding shelter in each other's silence. "Come on," he said finally, gesturing toward town. "Nora will kill me if I let you catch pneumonia." They walked back together, neither speaking but somehow saying everything that needed to be said. At the cafe's storage room, Matty started to remove his jacket, but he shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "Looks better on you anyway." As she watched him disappear into the rain, Matty pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling the ghost of that strong heartbeat she'd heard earlier. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was running away from her old life. She was walking, deliberately and bravely, into a new one. The morning began like any other at the Seaside Nook Cafe, until Maddie's phone screen lit up with a message that made her blood run cold. It was from her old neighbor in Philadelphia. "Derek's been asking around about you. He knows you're somewhere in Maine." 3 months of careful anonymity threatened to shatter. Maddie's hands trembled as she tied her apron. Her growing baby bump now visible beneath her sweater at 16 weeks. The morning regulars were filing in, fishermen with salt-worn hands, teachers from the local high school, Caleb in his usual corner with his coffee and books. "You're pale as a ghost," Nora said, appearing at her side with a cup of chamomile tea. She'd switched Maddie to herbal blends since learning about the pregnancy. "What's wrong?" Before Maddie could answer, the cafe's door chimed. A well-dressed woman in her 50s entered, her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer clothes standing out sharply against the cafe's rustic charm. Maddie's heart stopped. Veronica Whitaker, her mother. "Madison," Veronica's voice cut through the morning chatter like a knife. "Through the morning chatter like a knife. Did you really think you could hide forever?" The cafe fell silent. Maddie felt the weight of every eye in the room, firm, but none more heavily than Caleb's concerned gaze from his corner. "Mother," Maddie managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "How did you find me?" "Really, darling. There are only so many small towns in coastal Maine." Veronica's heels clicked against the wooden floor as she approached. "Derek is beside himself. Do you have any idea what your disappearing act has done to his reputation at the hospital?" A familiar anger bubbled up in Maddie's chest, the same one she'd suppressed at countless family dinners and social events. "His reputation?" She gave a hollow laugh. "Did you ask him about Camille?" Veronica's face tightened. "Marriage isn't a fairy tale, Madison. We've discussed this. Sometimes we must overlook things to maintain the life we've built." "The life you built for me, you mean?" Maddie's hand moved protectively to her stomach, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Her mother's eyes widened, genuine shock breaking through her polished veneer. "You're pregnant." The words came out as an accusation. "Does Derek know?" "No," Maddie said firmly, "and he's not going to." "Don't be ridiculous." Veronica reached for Maddie's arm. "You're coming home with me right now. We can fix this before." "She's not going anywhere." Nora's voice rang out, clear and firm. She moved to stand beside Maddie, her presence solid and reassuring. Veronica's eyes narrowed. "I don't believe this concerns you. Anyone threatening one of my family concerns me." Nora's tone left no room for argument. "And Maddie is family." Now Caleb had risen from his seat, his military bearing more pronounced than usual, as he positioned himself near the counter, not interfering, but making his presence known. "Family," Veronica scoffed. "These people. This is what you left us for? A shabby cafe in a town that's barely on the map?" Something in Maddie snapped. All the years of trying to meet impossible standards, of smiling through betrayals, of shrinking herself to fit into the mold her parents had created, it ended here. "These people," she said, her voice rising, "have shown me more real love and support in 3 months than you have in my entire life. They don't care about my last name or my husband's position or what charity board I sit on. They care about me." She took a step toward her mother, standing taller than she ever had before. "I'm not that perfect, silent daughter anymore. I'm building my own life, for myself and my child. And if Derek wants to find me, tell him to try. But I won't go back to living in shadows." Veronica's composure cracked for just a moment, showing a flicker of something. Regret, fear, but it vanished quickly behind her practiced mask. "You'll regret this, Madison. When you're alone and struggling, remember that you chose this." "No, Mother. I'll remember that I chose myself." After Veronica left, the cafe remained quiet for a long moment. Then old Bill, the fisherman who always ordered the same breakfast at 6 a.m., sharp, cleared his throat. "Well, I reckon that coffee's gone cold. How about a fresh cup?" Just like that, the normal morning rhythm resumed. But something had changed. As Maddie moved among the tables, she felt stronger, more certain. Nora squeezed her shoulder as they passed each other behind the counter, and Caleb's eyes held a new respect when she refilled his cup. Later, as she wiped down tables during the afternoon lull, she found a folded note near Caleb's usual spot. Inside, in neat, precise handwriting, were words that made her smile through her tears. "Some battles make us stronger. You fought well today, warrior." November brought fierce storms to Wren's Bay, the kind that rattled windows and sent waves crashing over the seawall. One particularly brutal evening found Maddie closing up the cafe alone. Nora had left early with a migraine, trusting her completely now with end-of-day duties. The ultrasound photos from her 20-week appointment were safely tucked in her apron pocket. A girl. She was having a daughter. The knowledge felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and finally choosing to spread her wings. Thunder crashed overhead as she counted the register, and the lights flickered ominously. Her phone, charging behind the counter, lit up with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was Philadelphia. Her hand hovered over it before declining the call. Seconds later, a text appeared. "I know where you are, Maddie. We need to talk." Derek. Her legs gave out and she sank onto a nearby stool. How had he? Then she remembered her mother's visit 2 weeks ago. Of course, Veronica Whitaker would never keep such information from Derek, her ideal son-in-law. The bell above the door chimed, making her jump. Caleb stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his jacket. "Thought you might need help closing up," he said, then noticed her expression. "What's wrong?" Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. Multiple messages. "Now the silent treatment is childish, Madison. Do you have any idea what you've done to our family's reputation? I'm driving up tomorrow. This ends now." The phone slipped from her trembling fingers. Caleb caught it before it hit the floor, his eyes scanning the messages, his jaw tightening. "He's your husband?" The question was quiet, but she could hear the controlled anger beneath it. "Yes." The word felt like ash in her mouth. He found me. He's coming here." Lightning illuminated the cafe in stark flashes, turning the cozy space suddenly strange and threatening. The lights flickered again and went out completely, leaving them in darkness, broken only by the storm's electric displays. "I can't." Maddie's breath came in short gasps. "I can't let him find me. Not now, not with—" Her hands pressed against her stomach, where her daughter had started kicking more forcefully, as if sensing her mother's distress. Caleb moved with decisive efficiency, finding the emergency flashlight behind the counter. "Do you trust me?" he asked, his voice steady and sure. She looked up at him in the beam of the flashlight, at the man who had become such a constant presence in her new life, who shared her silence on hard days and made her laugh on good ones, who understood the weight of secrets and the cost of starting over. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Then let's go. I know a place." They locked up quickly, then ran through the downpour to his truck, an old Ford that had seen better days but rumbled to life reliably as they drove through the storm-darkened streets. Maddie's phone continued to light up with messages. She turned it off. Caleb took them up the coast, away from town, until they reached a small cottage perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. "My grandfather's place," he explained as they hurried inside. "He left it to me after he passed. I come here sometimes, when the memories get too loud," she finished softly. He nodded, moving through the darkness with familiar ease to light a kerosene lamp. The cottage was simple, but well-maintained, with worn furniture and walls lined with books. A fishing rod stood in one corner, and maps were spread across a desk by the window. "You'll be safe here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Derek won't find you. I can't ask you to." "You're not asking." He turned to face her, his eyes intense in the lamplight. "I've seen what happens when good people are trapped by those who claim to love them. I've seen it in war zones, and I've seen it here at home. Not again, not you. The storm raged outside, but inside the cottage, something shifted between them. Maddie found herself stepping closer, drawn by the warmth and security he represented. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I know. His hand found hers in the dim light, calloused fingers intertwining with her own. But you're not alone anymore. Whatever comes tomorrow, we'll face it together. Her daughter kicked again, and without thinking, she guided his hand to feel it. The moment was intimate, charged with unspoken feeling and possibilities. Outside, the thunder gradually moved off to sea, but neither of them moved away. In the soft glow of the lamp, surrounded by books and maps and the echoes of healing, Maddie realized something profound. She wasn't just running from Derek anymore. She was running toward something too. Toward a future where love didn't mean sacrifice, where strength meant allowing others to help carry your burdens, where home wasn't a perfect mansion in Philadelphia, but a heart brave enough to start again. Morning brought weak sunlight filtering through the cottage windows. Maddie woke on the old leather couch, wrapped in a handmade quilt that smelled of sea air and cedar. Caleb had insisted on taking the floor, though she'd protested. Now she watched him moving quietly in the small kitchen, his military precision evident in how he prepared coffee and toast without making a sound. Your phone's been quiet, he said, noticing she was awake. But I drove into town at dawn. Derek's Mercedes was parked outside the cafe. Maddie's heart clenched. She could picture him there. Tall, immaculately dressed, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his surgeon's hands manicured. The image that had once made her feel safe now filled her with dread. Nora's handling it, Caleb continued. Bringing her chamomile tea. She's got half the town running interference. Old Bill's crew is keeping watch on the harbor, and Dr. Hartman rescheduled your appointment for next week. I can't hide forever, Maddie said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. He won't leave until he finds me. Then we make sure he finds you on your terms, not his. A knock at the door made them both freeze, but it was Nora's voice that called out, Just me, dear. She entered like a force of nature, carrying bags of groceries and righteous anger. That husband of yours, she said, setting down her loads, is quite the piece of work. Striding into my cafe like he owns the place, flashing that smile that probably works wonders on his nursing staff. What did he say? Maddie asked, dreading the answer. Oh, he played it perfectly. All concern and worry about his troubled wife. Talked about how you've been unstable lately, how you need help. Nora's eyes flashed. But I've seen enough abusers in fancy suits to know one when I meet him. He never hit me, Maddie said quickly, then paused. He just made me feel invisible. Unless I wasn't perfect enough, then he made sure I knew it. Some wounds don't need fists to cut deep, Caleb said quietly, and something in his voice made Maddie wonder what ghosts he was fighting. Nora pulled out her phone, showing them a text. He's booked a room at the Harborview Inn. Says he won't leave until he talks to you. The baby kicked hard, and Maddie pressed her hand to her side. The movement caught Caleb's attention. You're showing, she said softly. He'll know as soon as he sees you. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Caleb suggested, his voice careful. He needs to understand what he's really lost. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Maddie thought about Derek's reaction to the pregnancy, how he'd probably try to use it to force her back, to rebuild his perfect image of a family. The thought made her nauseous. I need to face him, she said finally, but not alone. Never alone, Nora assured her, squeezing her hand. They formed a plan. The confrontation would happen at the cafe after closing, neutral ground, but territory where Maddie felt strong. As evening approached, Caleb drove them back to town, taking back roads to avoid the main street where Derek might be watching. The cafe was closed, its windows dark. They entered through the back door, and Maddie immediately felt the comfort of the familiar space. The lingering scent of coffee and baked goods, the creaky floorboard by the counter that she'd learned to step over, the walls that had witnessed her transformation from running away to standing her ground. At exactly 7, headlights swept across the front windows. Nora positioned herself behind the counter, pretending to clean. Caleb sat at his usual corner table, seemingly absorbed in a book but coiled with tension. And Maddie Maddie stood in the center of the cafe, one hand resting on her visible bump, waiting. The bell chimed. Derek stepped inside, and for a moment Maddie saw him through new eyes. His expensive coat, his confident stance, the way he filled the doorway with his presence. All the things that had once impressed her now seemed like a costume, a carefully constructed facade. "Madison," he said, his voice carrying that familiar note of gentle disappointment that had once made her scramble to please him. "What are you doing?" She met his gaze steadily, feeling the strength of the people who had her back. "I'm living, Derek. Really living, for the first time in years." His eyes dropped to her stomach, and she saw the exact moment understanding hit him. His perfect mask cracked just slightly, revealing something ugly underneath. "You're pregnant." The words came out sharp, accusing. "And you didn't tell me? Like you didn't tell me about Camille?" The name hit Derek like a physical blow. He recovered quickly, but Maddie had seen it, the flash of panic in his eyes, the slight step backward. His recovery was smooth, practiced. "That's different," he said, his voice taking on the condescending tone he used when explaining things to difficult patients. "You're being irrational, Madison. You're hormonal, clearly not thinking straight. Let's go home and discuss this like adults." "Discuss what?" Maddie's voice rose slightly. "How you've been sleeping with a resident while I underwent fertility treatments. How you made me think it was my fault we couldn't conceive. Or should we discuss the other women before her?" Derek's eyes darted to Nora and Caleb, his jaw tightening. "This is a private matter between husband and wife. I don't think we need an audience for—" "They stay," Maddie cut in firmly. "No more secrets, Derek. No more perfectly crafted lies." He moved closer, lowering his voice to that intimate whisper that used to make her doubt herself. "Think about what you're throwing away. Your parents are devastated. The hospital board is questioning my judgment because of your episode. Is this really the life you want?" His gesture encompassed the cafe with barely disguised disdain. "Working in a small-town diner? Associating with—" His eyes flicked to Caleb. "People who clearly have their own issues?" The old Maddie would have crumbled under that voice, those implications. But she wasn't that woman anymore. "Yes," she said simply. "This is exactly the life I want. Because here I'm not your perfect accessory. I'm not my mother's project. I'm just me. And for the first time that feels like enough." "And our child?" Derek's voice turned silky. "Do you really think you can provide the kind of life it deserves? The education? The opportunities? Don't be selfish, Madison." The word selfish hit a nerve. How many times had he used it to control her? But before she could respond, Caleb's chair scraped back. "Careful," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced far worse than an angry surgeon. "You're not in Philadelphia anymore. Your name doesn't carry weight here." Derek's mask slipped further, showing the rage beneath. "Are you threatening me? Do you have any idea who I am? A man who cheats on his wife, gaslights her about fertility issues, and then tries to manipulate her with money and status?" Nora's voice rang out. "Yeah, we know exactly who you are." "You've poisoned her against me," Derek snarled, his composure finally cracking. He reached for Maddie's arm. "This ends now. We're going." Several things happened at once. Caleb moved with military precision, placing himself between them. Nora reached under the counter. "And Maddie?" Maddie found her voice. "Don't touch me." The words exploded from her with years of suppressed anger. "You don't get to decide anymore. Not about me, not about my daughter." "Daughter?" Something dark crossed Derek's face. "You know what gender it is? You've been seeing doctors behind my back?" "I've been living my life," Maddie shot back. "Something you never wanted me to do. You wanted a trophy wife who would smile at your galas and ignore your affairs, who would give you children when it suited your career timeline, who would never question, never challenge, never be real." She pressed her hand to her stomach, drawing strength from the life growing inside her. "But that's not me anymore. I'm filing for divorce, Derek. You can fight it, try to drag my name through the mud, whatever you want, but you can't have me back. And you will never control my daughter's life the way you controlled mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek looked around the cafe, at Caleb's combat-ready stance, at Nora's resolute expression, at the woman his wife had become without his permission. For the first time, he seemed to realize he had lost control of the situation entirely. "This isn't over," he said. But his voice had lost its power. "Your parents can either accept my choices or lose me forever," Maddie finished. "That's their decision to make, just like this is mine." He stood there for a moment longer, the perfect facade crumbling around him. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The bell chimed with finality as the door closed behind him. Maddie's legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she could fall, guiding her to a chair. Her hands were shaking, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. "I did it," she whispered, half in disbelief. "I really did it." "You did," Nora confirmed, coming around the counter to wrap her in a fierce hug. "And honey, you did it beautifully." Later, after Nora had gone home and the cafe was truly closed, Maddie and Caleb sat at his corner table. The victory of the confrontation had left her drained, but peaceful. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for understanding." "Always," he replied, and in that one word was a promise deeper than any vow Derek had ever made. 3 months after the confrontation with Derek, spring was beginning to touch Wren's Bay. Maddie stood in the empty apartment above the Seaside Nook Cafe, watching morning light stream through freshly washed windows. Nora had offered her the space when the previous tenant moved out, insisting the rent would be reasonable. "I need some work," Nora had said, "but so did you when you first arrived. Look how well that turned out." At 7 months pregnant, Maddie's daughter made her presence known with constant movement, especially when Caleb was around. He'd been helping her renovate the apartment on his days off from the marina, and today they were painting the nursery. "I still think you're crazy for wanting to do this yourself," he said from the doorway, carrying paint cans and brushes. His t-shirt was already marked with primer from earlier work. "Dr. Hartman said light activity is good for me," Maddie replied, running her hand over her rounded belly. "Besides, I want to do this. I never got to choose anything in my old house." The designers had handled everything. The nursery walls would be a soft sea green, like beach glass caught in morning light. No pink princess themes or elaborate murals, just the color of new beginnings. A rocking chair, refinished by old Bill himself, sat in the corner. The locals had rallied around her after Derek left, offering furniture, baby clothes, and most importantly, acceptance. As they worked, Caleb told her about his latest project at the marina, restoring an old sailboat that had weathered too many storms. His voice was different when he talked about his work, lighter, as if the ghosts of war retreated when his hands were busy bringing things back to life. "The owner wanted to scrap her," he said, carefully edging around the window frame. "But sometimes the things that look most broken just need someone to see their worth." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Maddie thought about the broken woman who had arrived in Wren's Bay months ago, and the strength she'd found in herself since then. The divorce proceedings were moving forward. Derek had tried to fight it at first, but Maddie's evidence of his affairs, including testimonies from hospital staff who had witnessed his behavior, had forced him to back down. Her parents still weren't speaking to her, but last week she'd received a small package from her grandmother, a silver locket containing a 4-leaf clover she'd found as a child. "For luck and love," the note had read, "both the kind you find and the kind you choose." A splash of paint hit her cheek, breaking her reverie. Caleb tried to look innocent, but failed. "Really?" she laughed, retaliating with her own brush. Soon they were both speckled with sea green, their laughter echoing through the empty rooms. "You've got paint everywhere," he said, stepping closer to wipe a drop from her nose. His touch lingered, gentle and questioning. "Caleb," she whispered, her heart racing. I might not be ready." "I know," he said softly. "We've both got healing to do, but I'm not going anywhere." The baby kicked forcefully, making Maddie gasp. Without hesitation, Caleb's hand moved to her belly, his touch warm and steady. They stood like that, connected by the promise of new life and the possibility of love that grew slowly, rooted in trust and understanding. Later that evening, after Caleb had gone home and the paint fumes had cleared, Maddie sat in the rocking chair, watching the sunset over the harbor. Her phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. Derek had finally agreed to her terms, including her request to keep the discussion of their divorce private. She'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like freedom. On her bedside table lay the latest ultrasound photo and a copy of The Old Man and the Sea, Caleb's favorite Hemingway. He'd left it for her last week. A passage underlined in his careful handwriting. But man is not made for defeat. A man can be destroyed but not defeated. Or a woman, Maddie thought, smiling as she felt her daughter move again. The nursery walls were drying in their new color, the furniture slowly finding its place. And somewhere between the pain of her past and the uncertainty of her future, she had found her own truth. Love shouldn't diminish you. Real love, whether from family of choice or the careful awakening of romance, should make you more full of yourself. She turned off the lights, pausing in the doorway of what would be her daughter's room. In the dim evening light, the sea-green walls seemed to glow with possibility. "Welcome to our new beginning, little one," she whispered. "We're going to write our own story." On a bright June morning, as dawn painted Wren's Bay sky in shades of pearl and gold, Lily Grace Whitaker came into the world with her mother's determination and a cry that rang with freedom. She had Maddie's blue-gray eyes and a dusting of blonde hair that caught the early light streaming through the hospital windows. Dr. Hartman smiled as she placed the newborn in Maddie's arms. "She's perfect," she said, then added with a wink, "and she certainly knows her own mind." Nora, who had been there through every contraction, wiped tears from her eyes. "Just like her mama," she said, squeezing Maddie's hand. Outside the room, Caleb paced the hallway with military precision, wearing a path in the linoleum until they let him in. When he saw Maddie holding Lily, he stopped in his tracks, emotions playing across his usually guarded face. "Would you like to hold her?" Maddie asked softly. His hands, so capable with boat engines and building repairs, trembled slightly as he cradled Lily. The baby settled instantly in his arms, as if recognizing a kindred spirit, another soul who had found healing in Wren's Bay's embrace. 1 week later, Maddie sat in her favorite spot on the beach, Lily sleeping peacefully in her carrier. The divorce had been finalized 3 days before her daughter's birth. Derek had sent a sterile congratulatory message through his lawyer, along with papers relinquishing any claim to custody. His new life with Camille was already making headlines in Philadelphia's social circles. Maddie touched the silver locket from her grandmother, now containing a tiny photo of Lily. The morning breeze carried the scent of salt and new possibilities, and she could hear the distant sounds of Wren's Bay waking up. Old Bill's fishing boat heading out to sea, the early customers arriving at the Seaside Nook Cafe. "Mind some company?" Caleb's voice was accompanied by the aroma of coffee. "Decaf for her, regular for him." "Never," she replied, making room on the blanket. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the waves. Lily stirred, making those small baby sounds that never failed to amaze Maddie. Without discussion, Caleb reached over to adjust the sunshade over the carrier, his movements natural and protective. "I got a call from a private boat owner in Portland," he said finally. "Wants me to restore his entire fleet. It would mean opening my own shop." Maddie turned to look at him, seeing the mix of excitement and uncertainty in his eyes. "That's wonderful. But it would mean leaving Wren's Bay." "No," he said quickly. "I'd stay here, commute when needed. Some places," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "some places heal you, and some people make you want to build something real." The weight of his words settled between them like a promise. Over the past months, their relationship had grown like a garden, carefully tended, deeply rooted, allowed to bloom in its own time. "I've been thinking about the cafe," Maddie said. "Nora offered to make me a partner. Said it's time she had someone to share the load with. And I think I'm ready. Not just for the cafe, but—" She met his eyes. "For everything else, too." Caleb's hand found hers in the sand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of practice. Lily chose that moment to wake fully, demanding attention with a determination that made them both laugh. As Maddie lifted her daughter, she caught sight of her reflection in the water's edge. The woman looking back at her wasn't the perfectly polished wife from Philadelphia. Nor was she the frightened refugee who had first arrived in Wren's Bay. This woman had weathered storms and emerged stronger, had learned that love shouldn't require shrinking yourself, had discovered that family could be found in the most unexpected places. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, watching her with those understanding eyes that had seen her through so many transitions. "I'm thinking about shadows," she replied, holding Lily close, "and how sometimes you have to step through them to find your light." The sun climbed higher over Wren's Bay, casting their shadows long across the sand. A man, a woman, and a baby, their silhouettes merging into one. In the distance, the cafe's morning crowd spilled onto the sidewalk, and Nora's laugh carried on the breeze. Here, in this small coastal town, Maddie had found more than escape. She'd found herself. The future stretched before them like the endless horizon, full of possibilities and challenges they would face together. Lily waved her tiny fists at the seagulls overhead, fearless and free, while Caleb's steady presence beside them spoke of promises kept and love freely given. "Ready to head back?" he asked, standing and offering his hand. Maddie smiled, taking his hand and rising with their daughter held close. "Yes," she said, and meant more than just leaving the beach. "I'm ready for everything." Together they walked toward town, their footprints in the sand telling a story of endings and beginnings, of shadows left behind and light embraced. And in Maddie's heart, where fear had once lived, there was only gratitude, for the storm that had driven her to this shore, and for the courage she'd found to stay and build something beautiful from the wreckage of her past. The end. 3 years later, the Seaside Nook Cafe buzzed with its usual weekend morning crowd, the aroma of fresh coffee mingling with sea air through the open windows. Behind the counter, Maddie expertly balanced a tray of muffins while answering questions about the day's specials. The silver locket still hung around her neck, now containing 2 photos, baby Lily, and a more recent one of their small family. "Mama, look!" 3-year-old Lily's voice rang out above the cafe chatter. She sat at her regular spot, a small table near her father's old corner, coloring with the focused determination that made her so much like her mother. Her blonde curls caught the morning light, and her blue-gray eyes sparkled with excitement as she held up her latest masterpiece. Caleb, fresh from the marina where his restoration business had grown to include a small fleet of loyal clients, scooped up their daughter with practiced ease. The wedding band on his finger caught the light, a simple silver ring that matched the one Maddie wore, exchanged 1 year ago on the same beach where they'd shared so many meaningful moments. Nora, now semi-retired but still the heart of the cafe, emerged from the kitchen with a plate of her famous blueberry scones. Time had added more silver to her hair, but hadn't dimmed the sparkle in her eyes. She'd walked Maddie down the aisle at the wedding, filling a role Maddie's parents had chosen not to accept, though Veronica and Robert Whitaker had eventually sent a card when Lily turned one. Their relationship remained distant, a fact that no longer caused Maddie the pain it once had. She'd learned that family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about who chose to stay. When the storms came, the bell above the door chimed, and Dr. Hartman entered with her weekly order. Her eyes fell on a small "Coming Soon" sign near the register, plans for the cafe's expansion into the neighboring storefront, where Maddie would soon open a bookstore addition, inspired by her daughter's love of story time. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting familiar shadows across the worn wooden floors. But these shadows didn't frighten Maddie anymore. They were just reminders of how far she'd come, of all the light she'd found on the other side of darkness. Lily's laughter echoed through the cafe as Caleb pretended to steal a bite of her scone, and Maddie felt that familiar warmth in her chest. Here in this small coastal town between the endless sea and the infinite sky, she'd found more than escape. She'd found her way home. And it had been worth every step of the journey. Based on Maddie's emotional journey from her seemingly perfect life in Philadelphia to her brave decision to start over in Wren's Bay, a profound question arises that we all face at some point. If you found out today that your perfect life was built on lies and manipulation, would you have the courage to abandon everything and start again from scratch, even without knowing what the future holds? Dear friend, life, as the Stoics remind us, is not about the hand we're dealt, but how we choose to play it. Maddie's story isn't just fiction, it's a reflection of the quiet courage so many carry. True strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "This isn't right," and walks away, even when the path ahead is uncertain. Her journey is a reminder that starting over isn't a failure, It's an act of love for yourself, for your future, and for the life you truly deserve. So if you're standing at a crossroads, wondering whether to stay where it's safe or step into the unknown, I hope you remember Maddie. And I hope you remember this. You are not meant to shrink to fit someone else's mold. You are meant to rise, again and again, toward the light that calls your name. If this story touched something in you, please don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, share it with someone who needs a little courage today, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for being here. Your journey matters, and you're never alone. See you in the next story.